That the road to the 2023 edition of the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, scheduled for Egypt later in November, has been formally opened. Africa's northern region's biggest economy is hosting the high-profile biennial affair and conference again after its debut in Cairo, Egypt, back in 2018. Speaking to the upcoming event on Wednesday was Kanayo Awani, the executive vice president of the IATF, and Egypt's deputy minister of trade and industry, Yahya El-Watek.
The way we are wired is there has not been interaction between our countries, and that's why I talked about fragmented markets earlier on. It is precisely to overcome the lack of information, inaccessibility of market and trade information, that we have been working with partners to introduce the Intra-African Trade Fair to support the AfCFTA. This is a platform that is held every 2 years to connect buyers and sellers across Africa, and to also connect investors to investment opportunities within the continent, to address that very point of the lack of access to trade and market information, to investment information as well. If you take, for instance, it is simply because of the lack of information that countries like South Africa, Tunisia, Morocco import around 400 million worth of leather products annually. They do so from Europe and South America. In the meantime, countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan, which have the capacity to fulfill a substantial part of this demand, continue to export the same leather products to markets in Europe and Asia. Similarly, West African countries import meat products more than 3 billion annually from Argentina and Australia, while South Africa, while Sudan, while Mali, Namibia, Chad can supply that demand. So it is on that note that we have our work cut out for us. And we all have to be deliberate in making it happen. And that's the essence of the Intra-African Trade Fair, which held the inaugural one held in Cairo in 2018 very successfully. And we even we built on that to have a more successful one in IATF. We called it IATF 2021 in Durban last year. Collectively, those two editions brought together more than 2,500 exhibitors. But in terms of participation, Durban alone had 13,000 visitors physically in 2021 in Durban. Another 12 or 13,000 were there virtually because we have a virtual trade fair. So you can imagine what the 13,000 visitors will make, at least the impact it will make on this economy and in terms of trade and market opportunities. Again, very important. Those two editions have generated over $74 billion of deals. It gives a glimpse at the immense opportunity that exists for intra-African trade. Durban alone was about $42 billion in terms of trade. In terms of how Egypt has directly benefited from the trade and investment deals that I just talked about, in 2018, out of the deals worth about $32 billion in favor of Egypt, in favor all overall, Egypt accounted for almost $5 billion of that. And of that amount, 80% of that was fully implemented. So it's one thing to conclude to do the deals, but it's also another thing to implement them to closure. One of the major deals we originated during that fair was a financial advisory mandate with El Swedi and Arab contractors on the 3 billion Rufiji Dam and hydropower plant in Tanzania. At that deal, we signed, and the bank played, the Afreximbank played a leading role in the almost $800 million bundle of guarantees. Many international agencies and financial institutions will not touch that transaction. But again, in the spirit of the Africa we want, where we must take our destiny in our hands, that is probably the only transaction of this size, $3 billion project, almost $1 billion in contracting guarantees that was handled end to end by Africans, in spite of all odds. It's also the same thing as in 2021, where we generated $42 billion of deals, of which Egypt also accounted for over $6 billion of those. In terms of the overall participation across all verticals, the additions also attracted participation, as there are also non-African countries that participated as well. We always insist that non-African countries that participate must be in the context of investment goods, capital goods as well. There are several verticals of the trade fair, B2Bs, B2Gs. We also host buyers because we are mindful that the trade fair, one of the successes of the pillars of a successful trade fair is to have buyers come in so that they can also interact with the sellers or the exhibitors. So we also host, we sponsor buyers, to come for the trade fair. There will be so much said about the trade fair later, so I won't keep going into that. And there will be discussions around the various verticals, the virtual trade fair, the automotive show, the creative element of the trade fair that is embedded this year. As part of the creative, we've also included a culinary and gastronomy fair. We have a diaspora fair as well, and there'll be more said to that towards the end, later in the program. My call today is to call on the government of Egypt, the governorates. Time will not permit me to talk about the African Sub-Sovereigns Network, which will also have an event on the sidelines of the trade fair, where we want the sub-sovereign governments, the provincial governments, the local governments to be part of the AFCFTA movements, so that they themselves can also exchange trade and investment opportunities. So I'll also call on the banks and private sector associations to provide support in terms of mobilizing the Egyptian business community, including women-owned businesses and SMEs, to participate and take advantage of all that the IATF has to offer. Mind you, I might have to repeat that it offers a unique opportunity for Egyptian businesses to access this integrated market of 1.3 billion people and a combined GDP of $3.5 trillion US. I hate to sound like a broken record, but I have to keep saying it, that is a huge opportunity. As you can see, we have various interventions from the bank, and the bank has become a veritable project and trade finance supermarket. Because I haven't spoken about our impact equity fund, because aside from debt, we also provide equity. I haven't spoken about our project preparation facilities, because we also help to develop projects of bankability, where we have seen gaps. But we add product offering costs across various value chains of financing, in a sense. Let me, as I step aside, reiterate that we stand as Afreximbank committed to supporting intra-African trade and investment. And in so doing, we are committed to supporting the government of Egypt and the Egyptian private sector to ensure that there are adequate resources, both financial and non-financial, in place to not only adapt to a world of continued turbulence, but also to thrive in the new business environment created by the AFCFTA. I invite all of you to join us at IATF as sponsors and exhibitors as we work together to realize the vision of an integrated and prosperous Africa. I am optimistic, but the part of the reason I'm optimistic is that I've lived here for more than a decade. I've been lived in this very town for 14 years. I haven't lived here, and I know what the country is about. I'm optimistic that Egypt will be strongly represented. I'm optimistic that Egypt will take advantage of this opportunity that I hope I have done a good job at presenting.